Racist cop hits Morgan Freeman in the face, then is taught the lesson of his life. We dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of February. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this dream too. The sun blazed over the city, casting elongated shadows on the pavement as Morgan Jones strode down the busy street, her steps confident, her head held high. She had always been a fighter, sharp, resilient, unwilling to bow under the weight of injustice. Growing up in a world where her mere existence was questioned, she had learned to stand her ground. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold on that scorching afternoon. A sudden commotion erupted near a convenience store at the corner. Raised voices, the sharp sound of an argument slicing through the humid air. Morgan instinctively turned toward the scene, her gaze narrowing. A young black teenager, no older than 17, stood cornered by a police officer, a towering man with cold, calculating eyes and a rigid stance. The boy's face was lined with fear, his hands raised in submission, his voice barely audible as he tried to explain himself. Morgan's pulse quickened. She had seen this scene before, played out too many times in the streets of this city. A cop asserting dominance, abusing his power against those who couldn't fight back. The air crackled with tension as the officer, whose badge read K. Reynolds, shoved the boy hard against the store's brick wall. "I told you to shut up," Reynolds barked, his grip tightening on the teenager's wrist, twisting it at an unnatural angle. Morgan didn't think twice. She stepped forward, her voice steady yet sharp. "That's enough. He's just a kid." The officer turned slowly, his gaze locking onto hers, and for a brief moment, an eerie silence settled over the street. His lip curled in contempt as he took a step toward her. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" His voice dripped with disdain. Morgan didn't flinch. "I think your job is to protect, not brutalize." That was all it took. Before she could react, a fist came swinging toward her face, striking her with brutal force. The impact sent her staggering back, a sharp burst of pain exploding through her cheekbone. Gasps rang out from the small crowd that had gathered, horror reflected in their wide eyes. But Morgan didn't fall. She clenched her jaw, straightened her back, and met the officer's gaze head-on. A storm had begun, and she had no intention of backing down. The sting in Morgan's cheek was nothing compared to the rage swelling inside her. The world seemed to pause, the surrounding murmurs turning into a distant hum as she locked eyes with Officer Reynolds. His expression remained unmoved, a flicker of arrogance in his smirk, as if he believed he had just taught her a lesson. But he was wrong. He had just ignited a fire that would not be put out. A collective gasp from the growing crowd rippled through the air. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing every second of what had just transpired. Morgan steadied herself, her fists clenched at her sides, though she refused to react with the violence that had been inflicted upon her. Instead, she lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. "You think you can just hit me and walk away," she said, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. Reynolds scoffed, stepping closer, his towering figure attempting to intimidate her. "You should have minded your business," he sneered. "People like you always get in the way." Morgan's chest rose with a deep inhale. "People like me?" she echoed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You mean people who refuse to stay silent when injustice happens right in front of them?" The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a chorus of discontent swelling against the officer. Morgan wasn't alone in this. People had seen, had witnessed the abuse of power, and the weight of their collective outrage was pressing down on Reynolds. The teenager, who had remained frozen in fear, finally found his voice. "She didn't do anything wrong," he stammered, his eyes darting between Morgan and the officer. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "You're both obstructing an investigation," he snapped, but the words rang hollow. Everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about control. A voice from the crowd cut through the tension. "That was assault. We saw everything." Another joined in. "You're on camera, officer. You better hope that badge saves you." Morgan saw it then, the slight flicker of doubt in Reynolds' eyes. For the first time, he realized that the world was watching. The power he so easily wielded over others was slipping through his fingers. But before he could react, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Police backup. Morgan knew this was far from over, but she also knew one thing for sure. This time, the system wouldn't bury the truth so easily. The fight had just begun. The wailing sirens grew louder, piercing through the heavy air as multiple squad cars skidded to a halt around the scene. The blue and red lights cast erratic shadows on the pavement, illuminating the tense crowd, their phones still recording, their voices demanding justice. Morgan stood firm despite the throbbing pain in her cheek. She wasn't about to let them twist this narrative. Not this time. The teenager, still visibly shaken, clung to the moment, his eyes darting between the police cars and Morgan as if unsure whether to run or stay. A different officer, Sergeant Harper, stepped out of the nearest vehicle. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze flickered from the furious crowd to Reynolds, who stood rigid, hands at his sides, his jaw clenched. The weight of the cameras, the growing tension, it was all pressing down on him now. "Somebody better explain what the hell is going on here," Harper demanded, his voice sharp as he looked at Reynolds first. Reynolds didn't hesitate. "This woman interfered with my arrest," he said, pointing at Morgan, his voice cold and authoritative. "When I instructed her to back off, she refused. She escalated the situation and was acting aggressively." A wave of angry protests erupted from the crowd. "That's a damn lie," someone shouted. "We have it all on video," another voice cut in. "You hit her first." Harper's gaze hardened as he turned to Morgan. "Miss, what's your side of the story?" Morgan took a steady breath, choosing her words carefully. "That officer was harassing a young black boy for no reason. I stepped in to de-escalate, not to interfere. But instead of handling the situation like a professional, he hit me. The cameras don't lie." Harper turned to the surrounding crowd. "Who here has footage?" A chorus of voices rang out as multiple hands shot up, phones high, screens glowing with undeniable proof. Harper nodded once before stepping forward. "Reynolds, I need your body cam footage. Now." For the first time, Morgan saw it, the flicker of panic in Reynolds' eyes. He shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. "There was an issue with my camera. It wasn't recording." A fresh wave of outrage crashed through the crowd. Morgan folded her arms. "How convenient," she said, her voice laced with bitter sarcasm. Harper's gaze darkened, but before he could say anything else, another officer walked over and whispered something into his ear. His expression tightened. Morgan could feel the shift in energy. Something was happening behind the scenes. Then Harper looked at Reynolds. "You need to come with us?" The crowd roared in approval, but Reynolds didn't move. His jaw clenched as his face burned with anger. "Are you kidding me?" he hissed. "You're actually taking her side?" "This isn't about sides," Harper snapped. "It's about what's on those videos. If you're innocent, the footage will prove it. If not, you're going to have to answer for this." The power dynamic had shifted, and Morgan could see it. Reynolds wasn't in control anymore. The weight of the truth, the undeniable, recorded truth, was pressing down on him. Morgan exhaled slowly. This wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was a start. As Reynolds was led toward the squad car, Morgan knew the real battle was just beginning. The crowd remained electrified, their voices a mixture of relief and rage as they watched Officer Reynolds being escorted toward the squad car. Morgan's body ached, but she refused to let the pain distract her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The system had a way of protecting its own, and she wasn't naive enough to believe that a single arrest would dismantle the deeply rooted injustice that officers like Reynolds embodied. Sergeant Harper turned back to the crowd, raising a hand to settle the growing unrest. "We'll be taking statements," he announced. "If you have footage, make sure it's sent to the precinct." Morgan felt a presence beside her. The teenager, the one Reynolds had targeted, was still there, his expression unreadable, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. She turned to him, her voice softer now. "What's your name?" He hesitated before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "Isaiah." Morgan nodded, offering him the slightest reassurance. "You okay?" Isaiah swallowed hard. I don't know. I thought he was gonna." He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. He would have gotten away with it. If you hadn't stepped in, Morgan's chest tightened. How many times had this happened before? How many times had there been no camera, no witnesses willing to fight back? She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Not this time, she said. Not if we make sure the truth is heard. Isaiah's gaze flickered with something. Maybe relief, maybe fear, maybe both. He pulled his phone from his pocket and raised it slightly. I recorded it too, he admitted. Everything. Morgan smiled, pride swelling in her chest. Good, she said. Make sure it gets out. They can't erase what's in the light. Harper approached her again, his expression unreadable. Miss Jones, I'd like you to come down to the station to give an official statement. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Am I being arrested? Harper sighed. No, but you were involved in an altercation, and we need your full account. That footage helps, but I need your words on record, too. Morgan hesitated. The station wasn't a place she trusted. Too many black voices had been silenced inside those walls. Too many lives had been rewritten to fit a different narrative. But she knew this was bigger than her. I'll go, she said finally. But I want my lawyer present. Harper nodded. That's your right. As she prepared to leave with the officers, she turned to Isaiah one last time. Keep fighting, kid, she said. He nodded, the smallest ember of resilience in his eyes. As the squad car door shut behind her, Morgan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about Reynolds. This was about exposing something much bigger. And she wasn't backing down. The cold interior of the squad car felt suffocating. Morgan sat rigid, her hands resting on her lap as the vehicle pulled away from the scene. The sirens had been silenced, but the weight of what had happened still pressed down on her. Every bruise, every lingering sting of pain on her cheek, was a reminder that the fight was far from over. Sergeant Harper sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at her through the rearview mirror. He had been professional, restrained, but Morgan knew better than to assume that meant he was on her side. The system didn't bend easily, and no officer, no matter how neutral they appeared, was free from its grip. At the precinct, Morgan was led down a quiet hallway away from the holding cells, a calculated move to make it seem as though she wasn't a suspect. She wasn't fooled. She had seen this tactic before. Neutralize the situation, control the narrative, and make sure things didn't spiral too far out of the system's control. A few officers stared as she passed, their expressions unreadable, their judgment like an unspoken weight in the air. She didn't flinch. If they thought intimidation would work, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Inside the small, windowless interrogation room, she took a seat at the metal table. Harper sat across from her, setting a folder down in front of him. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Morgan knew the game. They wanted her to speak first, to let her nerves dictate the conversation. She didn't give them the satisfaction. Harper finally exhaled. I appreciate you coming in voluntarily, he said, folding his hands on the table. Morgan arched an eyebrow. Like I had a choice. He ignored the comment. We've reviewed some of the footage that was sent in. What happened back there was unacceptable. Morgan leaned forward. Then do something about it. Harper's expression didn't change. Internal Affairs is already looking into Reynolds. She let out a humorless laugh. Right? Internal Affairs. The same people who have covered for bad cops for years? That Internal Affairs? Harper's jaw tightened. Reynolds crossed a line, but this isn't just about him. You stepped into an arrest, Morgan. That complicates things. She narrowed her eyes. I stepped in to stop a kid from getting brutalized. That's not a complication. That's basic human decency. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, I need your official statement. What you say here will be used in the investigation. If Reynolds gets indicted, this will help. Morgan studied him carefully. There was something restrained in his tone, a hesitance she couldn't quite place. Do you actually believe that? She asked. Harper hesitated before answering. I believe in following the process. She scoffed. And what happens when the process is built to protect people like Reynolds? The door creaked open before he could answer. Morgan turned to see her lawyer, Vanessa Carter, step inside. A tall, composed black woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. We're done here, Vanessa said, setting her briefcase on the table. My client will give her statement, but not without the proper protections. Harper nodded, standing. Of course. As he left the room, Vanessa turned to Morgan. You okay? Morgan exhaled. I will be. But this isn't over. Vanessa's lips curled into a knowing smirk. No, it's just beginning. Morgan sat back, a newfound fire in her chest. She had been dragged into this fight, but now she was ready to take it all the way. Morgan sat still, her fingers resting against the cold metal table. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly, casting a stark glow over the room. Her lawyer, Vanessa Carter, adjusted her posture, clasping her hands together as she prepared to guide Morgan through what would be the first of many battles. You did the right thing, Vanessa said, her voice low and firm. But that doesn't mean they'll make this easy for you. Morgan let out a dry laugh. When have they ever? The door opened, and Sergeant Harper stepped back inside, now accompanied by another man, Assistant District Attorney Michael Conroy. He was a middle-aged white man with an air of calculated indifference, the kind of bureaucrat who weighed justice against political consequences. He took a seat, flipping open a file as he skimmed through its contents. Miss Jones, Conroy began, barely looking up. You're aware that your actions today have created quite a complicated situation. Morgan leaned back in her chair. Complicated for who? Conroy finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. We're dealing with the fallout of a very public incident. Multiple angles of footage have already been released, and Officer Reynolds' actions are under heavy scrutiny. However, he paused, tapping his fingers against the file. We also have footage showing that you escalated the situation. Morgan's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. I escalated it. Conroy nodded. You approached an active police situation, refused to comply with an officer's orders, and provoked a confrontation. That doesn't justify what happened to you, but it does mean this could be spun in different ways. Vanessa was quick to intervene. Let's be very clear here, Mr. Conroy. Morgan didn't provoke anything. She stepped in to prevent excessive force against a minor. The only person who escalated the situation was Officer Reynolds when he physically assaulted my client. Harper shifted uncomfortably, but Conroy remained calm. I understand your position, Miss Carter. And believe me, Reynolds is in serious trouble. But the reality is, cases like this don't always play out the way they should. Reynolds' legal team will argue self-defense, that Morgan was aggressive, that the crowd was hostile. Morgan clenched her fists under the table. And you're saying that's enough to let him walk free? Conroy sighed. I'm saying that the system moves slow. If we push too hard too fast, it could backfire. Morgan shook her head, rage simmering beneath the surface. So what? I'm supposed to just sit back and hope for the best? Vanessa turned to Conroy, her voice cold and measured. What exactly are you proposing? Conroy hesitated before speaking. The department will suspend Reynolds pending investigation. If we can keep the public narrative controlled, we can ensure a stronger case against him. Morgan laughed bitterly. Public narrative? You mean damage control? Conroy didn't deny it. The goal is to hold him accountable, but we have to be strategic. Morgan's blood boiled. And what happens to Isaiah? The kid who was actually being harassed? Does he get justice? Or does this just become another headline that fades away? Conroy hesitated, and that was answer enough. Vanessa sighed, gathering her papers. We'll give our statement, but make no mistake. This isn't going away quietly. Morgan stood, her pulse thrumming with adrenaline. You're right, because I'm going to make sure the whole world knows exactly what happened. Conroy exhaled, rubbing his temples. Miss Jones. But she was already walking out the door, Vanessa close behind. The battle wasn't just about Reynolds anymore. It was about the system that kept people like him protected. And Morgan was ready to burn that system to the ground. The night air was thick with the remnants of a heated day. Morgan stepped out of the precinct, inhaling deeply as she tried to steady the fire raging inside her. The battle lines had been drawn, not just against Reynolds, but against an entire system designed to shield men like him. This was no longer about a single punch. It was about justice, about making sure the world didn't turn the page and move on like it always did. Vanessa walked beside her, heels clicking against the pavement as they made their way toward the car parked down the street. You were right to push back in there, she said. Conroy and Harper? They're playing politics. They want to look like they're doing something without actually shaking the system too hard. Morgan scoffed, rubbing her cheek, the pain a dull, persistent ache. I don't have time for soft justice, Vanessa. If we don't force this issue, they'll bury it under paperwork and bureaucratic nonsense. Vanessa opened the car door, pausing before getting inside. Then we make sure they can't ignore it. Morgan's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see dozens of messages, missed calls, and social media notifications flooding her screen. The videos of Reynolds hitting her had gone viral. Hashtags with her name were trending. People were demanding action. One message stood out. Isaiah. Ms. Morgan, I don't know what to do. People keep reaching out to me. Some reporters. Some people saying I should be careful. I'm scared. Morgan's stomach twisted. She had been so focused on her own battle that she hadn't considered what this meant for Isaiah. He wasn't used to this kind of pressure. He was just a kid, caught in the storm. She immediately typed back. Stay calm. Don't talk to anyone yet. I'm coming to see you. Vanessa looked over. Isaiah. Morgan nodded. They're already coming after him. Vanessa sighed. Of course they are. They'll try to discredit him, intimidate him. If he folds under pressure, they can spin the narrative however they want. Morgan gritted her teeth. Then we make sure he doesn't fold. They drove in silence, the city lights flickering past as Morgan's mind raced. By the time they reached Isaiah's neighborhood, her resolve had hardened. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for him, for every person who had been silenced by fear and oppression. Isaiah's apartment was small, the walls thin enough that voices from the neighboring unit bled through. When he opened the door, his face was tense, his eyes darting down the hall, as if expecting someone to be watching. They won't leave me alone, he said as soon as she stepped inside. They're calling, messaging. Even some guys in suits showed up earlier, asking my mom questions. She told them to get lost, but I know she's scared. Morgan clenched her fists. They're trying to intimidate you. Isaiah swallowed hard. It's working. Morgan placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Listen to me. You are not alone in this. They want you scared because fear makes people stay quiet. But you have the truth on your side, and the world is watching. Isaiah's hands shook slightly, but he nodded. What do I do? Vanessa stepped forward. First, you don't speak to anyone without legal representation. If reporters call, don't answer. If anyone approaches you claiming to be from the police or an investigator, get their badge number and report it to me immediately. Isaiah exhaled. Okay. Morgan crouched to meet his gaze. And no matter what, you keep fighting. We're going to expose them, Isaiah. But we need to do this right. He looked at her, his young face carrying a weight far beyond his years. Finally, he nodded. I trust you. Morgan stood. Then let's take this fight where they can't control it. Straight to the people. She pulled out her phone and opened a live stream. The war had just begun. The screen on Morgan's phone flickered to life, casting a dim glow on her determined expression. The weight of what she was about to do pressed against her chest, but she didn't hesitate. The world needed to hear the truth. Not through the carefully crafted statements of politicians or police officials, but straight from those who had lived it. She steadied the phone in her hand, her voice calm but charged with conviction. To everyone watching, my name is Morgan Jones. By now, many of you have seen the footage of what happened today. But this isn't just about me. This is about a system that has been allowed to harm black and brown lives for too long without consequence. And it almost happened again today. Until the cameras caught it, Isaiah sat beside her, shifting nervously but determined to be part of this moment. His fingers gripped the hem of his hoodie as he took a deep breath. Morgan turned to him. Isaiah, do you want to tell people what happened to you? He swallowed hard before nodding. I was walking home from school when Officer Reynolds pulled up next to me. He told me to stop, said I looked suspicious. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but when I asked him why, he got mad. He grabbed me, shoved me against the wall, and said he'd arrest me if I didn't shut up. Morgan's jaw tightened, but she let him keep going. I was scared, Isaiah admitted, his voice wavering. I didn't know what to do. But then Morgan stepped in. She tried to help me, tried to tell him to stop. His eyes darkened, his gaze meeting the camera. And he punched her for it. The comments flooded in instantly. This is why we need accountability. Stay strong, Isaiah. We see you. He's just a kid. This has to stop. Morgan turned back to the camera. Officer Reynolds thought he could get away with this. He thought no one would care, that no one would listen. But we're not letting this disappear. I want everyone watching to share this story. Don't let them bury it. Her words ignited a fire across the internet. Within minutes, thousands were watching, sharing, and commenting. The movement was growing, and for the first time, Morgan felt the tide shifting in their favor. But just as she was about to end the live stream, Isaiah's phone buzzed violently. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. Morgan frowned. "What is it?" Isaiah hesitated, then turned the phone so she could see the message. "Unknown number. You should stop talking. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Morgan's blood ran cold. Vanessa, who had been silently monitoring the stream from the other side of the room, stood up sharply. "That's a threat." Isaiah's hands trembled as he locked his phone. "What do we do?" Morgan's gaze hardened. "We don't back down." Vanessa grabbed her coat. "We need to take this to the media before they try to silence you." Morgan nodded. "Then let's make sure the world hears us before they even get the chance." This wasn't just about one racist cop anymore. They had just declared war on the entire system. The weight of the message lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Isaiah's hands trembled as he clutched his phone, his breath coming in uneven spurts. Morgan recognized that fear, the kind that seeps into your bones, telling you to run, to hide, to silence yourself before they do it for you. But fear was exactly what they wanted, and she refused to give it to them. Vanessa snatched her own phone from the table, her fingers moving quickly as she scanned through her contacts. "We need to get ahead of this," she said. "I know a journalist at the Daily Ledger, someone who won't twist this story into some both sides nonsense. If they want to scare us, let's make sure they know the world is watching." Isaiah swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they come after my mom?" Morgan's heart clenched. It was a valid fear. The system never attacked head-on, not when it could apply pressure in quieter, more insidious ways. She'd seen it happen before. Jobs suddenly lost, landlords terminating leases, bank accounts mysteriously frozen. She knelt in front of him, her gaze steady. "We won't let them. Your mom is strong, and so are you. They're trying to make you feel small, Isaiah, but you are not alone in this. We're not just fighting for you. We're fighting with you." Isaiah exhaled, his shoulders rising and falling with the effort. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. "Okay." Vanessa lifted her phone to her ear. "I'll set up the interview. Morgan, we need to keep Isaiah somewhere safe for the night." Morgan thought for a moment before her mind settled on the safest place she could think of. "He's coming with me?" Isaiah's eyes widened. "To your place?" Morgan nodded. "You'll be safe there. No one's getting to you on my watch." Vanessa considered it, then sighed. "Fine. But first, we need to meet the reporter. We control the narrative now, before they try to twist it." As they gathered their things, Morgan's phone buzzed again. A different number, but the same intent. "Unknown number. Walk away from this, or you'll regret it." Morgan clenched her jaw. They thought she would break. They thought wrong. The newsroom buzzed with the quiet chaos of breaking news, reporters scrambling between desks, phones ringing in sharp bursts. The walls were lined with framed headlines, each marking a pivotal moment in history. Morgan, Isaiah, and Vanessa sat across from a journalist named Rachel Carter, a young black woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking on stories no one else dared to touch. She pressed record on a small device and leaned forward. "Morgan, Isaiah, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." Isaiah hesitated but nodded. Rachel glanced at Vanessa. "Before we begin, just to be clear, what exactly are we exposing here? The incident with Officer Reynolds, or the threats you've been receiving since?" Morgan exhaled. "Both." Rachel's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. "All right, let's start from the beginning." Morgan told her everything, the confrontation, the punch, the threats. Isaiah filled in the gaps, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger as he spoke. By the time they were done, Rachel sat back, exhaling sharply. "This is bigger than just one bad cop," she said. "This is about intimidation, about silencing people before they can speak." Morgan leaned forward. "That's why we need this story out there. Before they try to bury it." Rachel nodded. I'll make sure it runs first thing in the morning. I'll also loop in some national outlets. If they think they can scare you into silence, they're about to realize how wrong they are. Morgan's phone vibrated again, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a notification. Hashtag Justice for Morgan was trending. The fight was no longer just theirs. The world was watching now. By morning, the world had changed. Morgan sat in her small apartment, her phone vibrating nonstop. Messages, calls, notifications. Her name was everywhere. The article from the Daily Ledger had hit the internet like a wildfire, spreading across news networks, social media, and activist forums. The footage of Officer Reynolds hitting her had been played on every major station. But it wasn't just about her anymore. The threats against Isaiah, the unknown messages, the attempts to silence them. Rachel had included everything in the article. The story was no longer just about a cop's abuse of power. It had become a symbol of a system desperately trying to protect itself at the expense of truth. Morgan scrolled through the responses. This is why we march. Officer Reynolds needs to be in jail, not just under investigation. Protect Isaiah at all costs. If anything happens to them, we know exactly who to blame. Her heart pounded. The weight of this moment was bigger than anything she had imagined. Across the room, Isaiah sat curled on her couch, staring at his own phone with wide eyes. People are talking about me, he murmured. Like thousands of people. Morgan moved to sit beside him. They're talking for you, Isaiah. That's the difference. He hesitated. What if this makes things worse? Morgan sighed. It might, but silence won't make things better. Isaiah looked at her, searching her face for reassurance, then exhaled. Okay. Vanessa walked in from the kitchen, coffee in hand. The mayor's office just released a statement. Morgan's stomach twisted. And Vanessa read off her phone. We take allegations of misconduct seriously and are conducting a full investigation into the matter. However, we urge the public to allow due process to take its course before making judgments. Morgan scoffed. Translation: we hope this blows over before we actually have to do anything. Vanessa nodded. Exactly. But they're feeling the pressure. That's why they're scrambling. Before Morgan could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Her pulse quickened. Vanessa motioned for her to stay back as she moved cautiously to the peephole. After a tense moment, she relaxed. It's Rachel. Morgan exhaled and opened the door. Rachel stepped inside, her face set with urgency. We have a problem. Morgan's body tensed. What now? Rachel pulled out her phone, turning the screen toward them. A new video was making rounds on the internet. Footage from a police dashboard camera. The title read, New video shows Morgan Jones escalating the situation before punch. Morgan's blood ran cold as she watched. The clip had been edited, cutting out Reynolds' aggression toward Isaiah and only showing the moment Morgan stepped in, making it appear as if she had been the aggressor. The media had found its counter-narrative. They're trying to flip the story, Rachel said. They're making it seem like you provoked him. Isaiah's face paled. But that's not what happened. Vanessa cursed under her breath. This is classic damage control. They know they can't deny what Reynolds did, so they're twisting the framing to make it seem justified. Morgan clenched her fists. So, what do we do? Rachel's eyes hardened. We fight back. If they want to manipulate the truth, we make sure the real story is louder. Morgan nodded, her jaw set. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was a war over the truth itself. The air inside Morgan's apartment was thick with tension. Isaiah sat rigid on the couch, his face pale as he scrolled through his phone, reading the twisted narrative now spreading like wildfire. Vanessa paced the room, muttering sharp curses under her breath, while Rachel typed furiously on her laptop, already crafting the next wave of counterattacks. Morgan clenched her jaw as she watched the manipulated footage again. It was infuriating, edited just enough to frame her as the aggressor, to give the system an excuse to paint her as the problem. She slammed her phone onto the table. This is how they win. They make us look like the threat, so people stop caring about what really happened. Rachel didn't look up from her screen. They won't win if we control the next move. Vanessa stopped pacing. We need to do more than just react. We need to expose how deep this cover-up goes. She pointed at Rachel. Can you find out where this footage came from? Who leaked it and why? Rachel nodded. Already working on it. But we can't just fight this online. We need real action. Protests, legal action, pressure on the mayor's office. Morgan took a breath, steadying herself. Then let's hit them where it hurts. She grabbed her phone and opened a new live stream. Within seconds, thousands of people tuned in. She met the camera head-on. They want to rewrite the story, she began. They want you to believe that I was the aggressor, that Officer Reynolds had no choice but to hit me. But that's a lie. And here's the proof. She turned the screen, replaying the unedited footage from the bystanders' phones. It showed the full picture, Reynolds harassing Isaiah, his aggression, his unprovoked attack. They're trying to manipulate you, Morgan continued. But they can't erase the truth. We have the real footage. We have the voices of everyone who was there. And we won't let them silence us. The comments poured in. We see the truth. Keep fighting, Morgan. Expose the corruption. Where's the mayor now? Why isn't Reynolds in jail? Rachel looked up from her laptop. This is working. People are pushing back. But we need to take it a step further. Vanessa nodded. A press conference? Morgan blinked. What? Vanessa stepped forward. If we go live in front of cameras with attorneys, activists, and Isaiah, they can't ignore us. They can't twist what we say when we put it out ourselves. Isaiah tensed. I don't know if I can do that. Morgan turned to him, her voice softer. I won't make you do anything you're not ready for. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. Isaiah hesitated, then took a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. Rachel smiled. Then let's make it count. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the city courthouse steps. A crowd had gathered, activists, journalists, ordinary people who had seen what happened and refused to look away. Morgan stood at the podium, Vanessa at her side, with Isaiah just behind them. Cameras flashed, microphones stood ready. The air crackled with anticipation. She gripped the sides of the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke. My name is Morgan Jones. I was assaulted by Officer Reynolds for defending a black teenager from unjust harassment. Since then, I've been threatened, lied about, and watched as the system tried to silence me. She paused, looking out at the crowd. But we are not silent. She turned to Isaiah, giving him the space to speak. He hesitated, then stepped forward, his voice small but clear. I didn't do anything wrong, he said. But that cop treated me like I was already guilty. And when Morgan tried to help me, he hurt her instead. Now they're trying to make it look like it was her fault. His voice grew stronger. But we have the truth, and we're not letting them hide it. The crowd erupted in cheers. Vanessa took the mic next. We are calling for the immediate arrest of Officer Reynolds. Suspension is not enough. We want justice. We want accountability. And we won't stop until we get it. The journalists fired questions. Are you filing charges? What do you say to those who believe Reynolds acted in self-defense? Do you think the mayor is complicit? Morgan met their eyes unwavering. I say this. If they think we're walking away, they've already lost. The crowd roared again. But as she stepped down from the podium, Vanessa's phone buzzed. Her expression darkened as she read the screen. What is it? Morgan asked. Vanessa's voice was tight. Reynolds is missing. Morgan's stomach dropped. What do you mean missing? Vanessa turned the phone so she could see. Breaking news. Officer Reynolds has fled town amid investigation. Morgan exhaled sharply. This fight wasn't over yet. The news spread like wildfire. Officer Reynolds had disappeared. No one knew where he was, but his sudden flight from the city was a clear admission of guilt. The media was buzzing, questions flying about whether he had been tipped off, whether the department had helped him escape, or if he had simply feared the consequences of his actions. But for Morgan, the feeling was one of bitter clarity. The moment they had feared had arrived. The system, the one that had protected Reynolds all along, was showing its true colors. Vanessa's phone buzzed again as they gathered in Morgan's apartment, the tension palpable. She glanced at it and handed it to Morgan. It's the mayor's office. They want to meet. Morgan's heart raced. This was it, the opportunity to make them face what they had been avoiding. We don't meet on their terms, Vanessa said, her voice cold. Not without a full, public statement. Morgan nodded. We'll do it our way. We have the momentum now. They need to know we won't stop until Reynolds is held accountable. The mayor's office was opulent, bathed in warm wood tones and soft lighting. Yet it felt like a cage. Morgan sat across from the mayor, a middle-aged white man with a polished, practiced smile. "This isn't what we wanted," the mayor began, his tone calm, condescending. "We want to resolve this, but we need you to understand the bigger picture. We're dealing with a system here, Miss Jones. A system that needs to function." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "A system that lets a racist cop get away with abusing his power for years." The mayor shifted uncomfortably, but quickly recovered. "You have to understand, there are protocols in place. We can't rush to judgment, especially not in a case like this." Morgan's voice was sharp. "You're defending a man who assaulted me in front of dozens of witnesses. How many more times has he done this in the past? How many people have had their lives ruined by the same system that's protecting him now?" The mayor's eyes flickered for a brief second, but he masked it with a smile. "We're looking at all the evidence. We're doing our due diligence." Morgan leaned forward. "I've had enough of your due diligence. Officer Reynolds is a threat to this city. And if you think you can sweep this under the rug, you are wrong. You have a choice right now. Do the right thing, or be complicit in this cover-up. I will make sure the world knows the truth." The mayor's face hardened, and for the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. "You think the public cares about one man?" he asked, his voice lower now. "This is bigger than you." Morgan didn't hesitate. "It's bigger than you too. You think I'll let this go? You think I'll let this go?" Isaiah, who had been silently watching, stood up. "We won't stop, and neither will everyone watching us." The mayor remained silent, his fingers tapping against the table, his gaze shifting between Morgan and Isaiah. The walls, once so unyielding, now seemed to close in on him. Morgan's phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with breaking news. "Officer Reynolds has been found, now in custody." She exhaled slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It's over, Mayor. The truth won." As she stood up, she turned to Isaiah. "We did it." Isaiah met her gaze, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "We really did." As Morgan walked out of the mayor's office, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The fight wasn't over. There were still so many battles to come. But this chapter had ended, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like they had truly won. Months passed, and the dust settled. Officer Reynolds was tried, convicted, and sentenced for his actions. His story became one of many, a part of a larger, ongoing movement. Morgan and Isaiah, once strangers, were now friends, bonded by the shared experience of standing up against injustice. Morgan had found new purpose in using her voice, while Isaiah had found strength in knowing that his story mattered. Together, they had forced the world to listen. And that was just the beginning. If you made it this far, comment where you're watching from, and let us know if the story of justice